super excited to make this build video. Namoki has been incredibly generous to the channel once again by providing me with their new Alpine kit, and I actually missed the boat on the original Seiko Alpinist, and I wasn't able to obtain one at a reasonable rate. There is a price hike for the original at this point, and we do have the Pro Specs model, but both of which are a little bit high in price in terms of what you're getting for value, in my opinion. So when I saw this from Namoki, I was extremely excited. I had to contact them to see if they would be interested in sponsoring me doing a build for the kit, because it just hit right at home. It was like in the beginning of my collecting years when it was released, and because I missed out on the original availability, I was extremely excited for this. Also, seeing that it came with a Jubilee bracelet and everything else, I mean, it's pretty much a one-for-one copy of the Seiko Alpinist, but it's a phenomenal build, and Namoki makes extremely well-made parts, well-refined. Everything goes together very seamlessly. So here we are with the build. I'm showing you guys the parts at this point, seeing how everything functions. Now, it's a little bit different because the bezel sits on top of the case and you have to screw that in. And I was showing you guys the function of the second crown sitting underneath the main crown, of course. And what we have to do is we have to place this bezel in the front of it and then screw it from the back, and that's pretty much going to be the only difference that we're going to have with this build versus doing any other build. But there is a gasket involved behind that bezel, so we are going to, of course, apply more grease to it. We're going to clean off the edging for the bezel as well. I think there was just grease, honestly, but because I'm applying my own grease, I kind of wanted to just clean it off, clean, of course, the crystal. There's going to be a final cleaning. You know, cleaning is the main course for building, right? Because at the end of the day, you don't want to have to go back into the build. So I do preliminary cleaning. I go back and I do a final cleaning and final inspection before I case the movement and case the, you know, everything else. But as we go along, I love making these videos because I love explaining the entire process. I know it's a little bit longer in format. Some people enjoy seeing the build. Maybe you take this purchase and run with it as well, and you want to follow along as I do it. So I could do quick cuts. I could make this a 5 to 10 minute video, but I really like to explain the entire process and what goes on in my mind at point in time when I'm putting it together. So that gasket is nice and greased. So now we're receiving that crystal, or rather that bezel, into the case itself. Again, there are 4 screws that go into it, so you do have to line up the holes from the bezel to the case, flipping over the case and then screwing it in. So that's exactly what we're looking at here. And when you flip it over, you can then align the holes and make sure that they're going straight through. I would double check to make sure all 4 screws, of course, are being catched onto their threading to make sure we don't have any compromise with water resistance. But to be honest with you, because of the additional crown, because of the aspect of the crystal, personally, I will not be using this for any aquatic themes. I'm just super excited to put this Alpinist looking model onto my wrist because of the reasons I mentioned before. So super excited to make this build, and yeah, I'm just gonna walk you guys through it. So of course we're gonna screw everything in. I usually don't screw in the first screw all the way. I do like a half screw to mainly all of them, and then I go back and screw them in nice and tight. And I just showed you really quickly that there's 4 attachments there. Of course, we're going to check that internal rotating bezel to make sure that it's still freely running and still going around. Go do a full 360 just to make sure that when you did secure that bezel, that you didn't interfere with that function, as it will. And I was thinking that I should have maybe applied a little bit of grease onto the wheel inside that spins the internal rotating bezel. I didn't do that. I think, I'm not sure, to be honest with you, it is metal on the back of that bezel insert that spins, but it is what it is. If I see that there's any kind of resistance over time, I could always go back in there and apply that. So I'm not too mad. At this point, we're checking the movement, of course. That's the first thing that you want to do before you start doing anything else. And pay attention to how I'm actually holding the movement. I'm always holding it from the sides, never from the top or bottom. When you're handling that, of course is the way that you want to do it. This is the actual dial, and it's a beautiful dial. You got the sunburst green, you have the gold markers, there is a little bit of loom plots behind the indices, and of course the hands are going to be loomed, and the loom is absolutely phenomenal. What I'm going to do is, Namoki's been very generous to me, so I'm doing this build, and that's something that I like to do, but I'm also going to do a full review of the watch after it's built, right? It's a little unconventional because I'm technically the person putting it together, just like how you would if you were making the purchase of the kit. But just to give a full aspect, a full look over to the model once it's complete, I really want you guys to see some close-ups to really appreciate the finishing and everything else. So now we're putting on the dial, and of course we have to remove the dial feet that don't apply. There's always going to be 4 at least on the back of it, and you want to measure up, right? Measure twice, cut once, because once you remove the dial feet in the back of them, they're gone, right? So there's no real way of applying it back. Maybe you could solder it, but avoid it. Avoid that headache. Put that dial onto the movement and double check it. Now, as you saw, I kind of do like a little bit of a wiggle with the clipper instead of just clipping it. And the reason why I do that is I personally find that it breaks a little bit closer to the dial. Sometimes I've even snapped it off by wiggling it instead of clipping it. And I didn't have to do any filing. Here, I did have a little bit of a raise on both sides. It was very, very slight, but I want it to be completely flush. So we have to get the filer out now, and after we remove those dial feet, we're going to go ahead and file the back of it. Now, when you do this, you are creating quote unquote not dust particles, but metal metal pieces are going to come off of that, right? The material. So pay mind to that if you're shaving this down, if you have to get closer to the back of the dial to make it flush. And you're going to see me utilize things to clean off, and I do that right away. All right, because you have the movement exposed there. I really should have covered that movement in the background. I didn't do that. That's just something that I missed. But as you can see, I'm doing this away from the movement to prevent any of those pieces getting put onto it. And I'm also doing it away from the casing as well, because likewise, those metal pieces that I'm shaving off now, you don't want that to interfere. Right? They're so small, they are pieces of metal, so it could be a detriment to the movement itself. After we file it down, I usually use the end of the filer just to see if I can feel for a little bit of material being raised, but after which, of course, we get the blower, and then that's not enough. You might want to wipe it with something, or in my case, I use Rodico. And I'm blowing off the front of the dial as well here, because there's also inevitably going to be pieces of that metal that find its way through the aperture of the date wheel, and sometimes just rocking from back and forth. So try to do your best to not allow any of those pieces to get to the other side, the right side up side of the dial, because obviously those metal pieces can scratch it. So you see me using some Rodico now, and I use that to clean the area. I use that to clean the dial. I pretty much want to pick up all of those little shards of metal afterwards, and this is more of a preliminary cleaning for the dial, for like the biggest pieces that I can find that are on there. Of course, I'm going to also use the Rodico to hit the back of it. Just lift off everything. Take your time with the cleaning process, and I like to do about 3 rounds of that. So you're going to see that a lot throughout this video, because it is very important, and I'm pretty sure by now you can understand why. So everything gets a nice cleaning. We're going to dab the back of that, and then at that point the dial should be prepared to be received into the movement. Now there's little holes on the sides of the movement where this is going, and that's exactly where you were aiming for originally, right? That's where you were seeing what dial feet you have to take off. Now, one thing that I do run into sometimes, and this is the reason why we're doing this, right? So I can explain everything. Sometimes, even though you have the correct dial feet, that go into the movement, sometimes they'll be slightly bent. So if it's not coming down right away, don't press down to force it in. Sometimes, yes, it does require a little bit of pressure, but just check and make sure that those dial feet are sitting straight, and then take it from there. If it starts to go in a little bit, push down, but again, push down only on the edging of the dial. Do not push down in the middle. Don't put your thumb behind the movement. Yes, there's a rotator, but you have a balance wheel that's very fragile. So even when you're applying the dial into the movement, you're pushing down on the sides. And then after the dial goes down, of course, we're checking the function of the date to make sure that there's no fouling from the dial to the date wheel turnover. But then you also have to get it prepared for the hands, right? The moment that that date wheel turns over is where you want to start applying your hands, because you know that that's 12 a.m. at that point. So of course we're starting with the hour hand, and this is my method of doing it. I use radical to get it up on there, and then I use pegwood to just align it, and then I use the hand pusher just to put it down where I want to. Now these are applied hour markers, so I do like to get them down as close as I can before it fouls the hour marker for obvious reasons. And then I'll do a correction. Like as you saw just there, I pushed a little bit forward towards the 12 o'clock just to make it flush. But always pay in mind that you don't want that hour hand to foul any of the indices, because if you try to turn that and it is fouling, you could potentially break the hour hand at that point, and you don't want to do that. So another thing I want to mention, before I was using pegwood to scratch the dial a little bit. That was because there was like a smudge. There was some material on there that wasn't getting lift off with the regular radical that I was using, and that's okay. Purposely using pegwood at that point because I can't scratch the dial with pegwood. So just keep that in mind. And then also too, I'm sorry I missed it, but going back to when I lift the dial out of the plastic plate, again, I first picked up a metal tweezer and then I switched to a pegwood. And that is also important because I realized, hey, I don't want to use metal here on the dial. That's something that you never want to do. Here we're using pegwood and we're using plastic to push down the hands. Again, that's not going to scratch the hands. It may leave like a little bit of a smudge, which we do have to clean after we apply. But the minute hand gets applied the same exact way. It gets picked up with radical, and then I get it centered, I get it on there, then I use the hand pressed, and now I'm doing a little bit of an adjustment with the pegwood. I don't know, listen, I don't recommend you guys to do that. You can potentially bend it too much downward into the hour hand, and or puncture the loom that's on the hand. So, you know, just pay attention to that if you are going to attempt it. It's a very light push that I'm doing on there. I feel very comfortable. I've ruined loom before, so it is what it is. So now I'm just checking to make sure the turnover goes, and I'm cool with plus or minus 5 minutes for the turnover, and I do get it at +5 on this time around, and for me that's okay. I mean, I think if you're going to try to get it for exactly at 12 a.m. you'll drive yourself nuts. So the second hand is now going on, and I'm going to slow this down. So pay attention here. I slip here, I slip again, and then it finally has some resistance, and that's when I'm going to push it down. So there is a technique to the second hand. It is hard to see with the naked eye, but if you need to, go back, rewind that part, you'll see exactly how I get a feel for it rather than an eye for it. Yes, I'm getting very close up to the movement. My arms are on top of the desk. My chin is flush with the desktop itself. But at the end of the day, I wasn't using goggles when I did that. I was just seeing that slip over, and then when I saw that there was resistance and it was centered on the top, then I pushed down. And that doesn't guarantee that the second hand still will go in, but if you play this back and you look at that, you'll see actually the second hand sits down. It sits down after it was completely lined up, and that's when I felt confident to say, okay, it was ready to go on and everything else. So now I'm just making sure that that minute hand is not fouling the second hand. I'm making sure that the hour hand is lined up with the minute hand if I'm at 6 o'clock. Again, I personally, like, it's good enough for me. That may not have been like completely perfect, but for me, I don't need it to be completely perfect. I need it to be very, very close where it's almost like you can't tell. So that's that. So now we're removing the crown, of course, because at this point, when all the hands are on, we are going to prepare the case for the movement to be received into it. So this time around, I did cover the movement in the background, as you saw, which is good. And then I have this this stick with a little bit of glue at the end. I don't know what it's technically called, but it's phenomenal. I got to get me some more of it, because when it comes to cleaning the hands, when it comes to cleaning the dial, when it comes to cleaning the indices, or even the crystal, at this point, it's a phenomenal tool. And it really does pick up a lot of the dust particles that are very, very hard to see. Now, you have to kind of rock that crystal back and forth in the light source to make sure that you're getting everything. And you'll see me clean the top of it and the bottom of it, because I want to make sure that that dust is in fact superficial, and I'm not, guessing if that dust is on top or on the bottom. I want to make sure by the time I case this, there's absolutely nothing that I could see with the naked eye, because we all know as enthusiasts that would drive us crazy. So now the case is being received into the movement, and it's very important that you take your time when you're doing this. You have to make sure that you're completely straight, or at the very least, you're out of the way of the minute and hour hand. And in this case, the minute hand extends all the way out to the chapter ring. So there's very, very small room for error. You really can't put this in an angle, and you really don't want to. But at the very least, again, if you have very long hands, especially the minute hand and the second hand, then you want to make sure that you're not fouling those hands, because that's a disastrous move, right? Not only do you have to remove the hands, but you potentially bent them and they're no good. So all of that hard work you did prior will essentially be for nothing, because once you bend the hands, you're kind of beat. Now you're seeing me push in that movement, and I was making sure that it's all the way in. And as you saw, that was all done at the edging of the movement. Nothing was done towards the center. Of course, I stayed out of the way of the balance wheel, which I'll keep repeating and I'll keep saying, because it's probably one of the most important things. Guys, I've ruined it all. Okay, I've ruined hands. I've ruined balance wheels. I've done it all. Okay, so I'm just doing these videos so like that you know what not to do. And so now we have to size up the stem to the crown. Luckily for me, I mod a whole bunch of NH35s. So as you saw, that bag said cut, and that refers to the stems. These are pre-cut stems that didn't fit for other models. Maybe I cut them too short. Yeah, that's pretty much it. If I cut them too short, now I have to get a fresh one. I've purchased many stems before, so I just keep the ones that don't work. And I start with the smallest size that I have in that bag. Now, you're going to probably have to just take the one that's provided with the movement and measure and cut. But we're also going to see an example of that here as well, because as I put this crown into the casing itself, I see that there is a gap there, and I'm not comfortable with the amount of gap that's in between it. I think it could be a little bit better. So I am going to remove the stem from the crown again. And when I'm holding that stem, I know that I have to hold it closer to the grooves rather than the part that goes into the keyless works. So that's something that you're going to see here. That's the technique that I use. And I got rid of the other stems because this was already very close. The other ones are longer, so there's no point of me trying to do that with the other ones. So we did shave that down a little bit. We cleaned it with Rodico. We're reapplying that onto the crown. We're putting that into the movement once again to make sure that that is going to be the measurement and the size that we want. And of course, I took off the least amount of material that I can because we're pretty close to the size that we need. And with that being said, you always want to take off, like after you measure from the crown end to the inside of the case, you want to make sure that you're always taking off a little bit less than what you mark off, because you can always remove more. But once you remove too much, if you don't have a bunch of stems, now you have to sit and wait for that to come in, and that could be a little bit of a hassle. So now that I see that the measurement is correct for the stem to the crown going into the case, now we have to glue it. And this is the only thing that I don't see Namoki providing in any of their kits. This is a really inexpensive thing to purchase, but I'm using cement glue here, and this is how I utilize it. I have a tray for oils that I use when I'm practicing servicing movements sometimes, and I use the last one for just glue, getting it on the back of it, because I don't obviously want to pour it directly on there and put a whole bunch of gunk, and it keeps things a little bit more clearer just to dip it into that tray and then adhere that to the threading of the crown, as you guys see here. And then afterwards, whatever residue is left over, because as you thread that in, you're going to get some residue that gets pushed out naturally. So you're going to have to, in my personal opinion at least, I like to remove that and make it more of a clean thing. And Radico is going to be king of cleanup when it comes to this stuff. So again, holding that stem closer to, this is a little thing I like to do. I put the blower inside of the stem rather inside of the blower, and then I just use a couple of puffs just to have like a little bit quicker of a dry. Does it help? I don't know for sure, but in my mind, you know, air hitting glue helps it to dry a little bit faster. So that's what I do. And then of course, like I said, I'm cleaning that off the excess at the end with Radico, and then I have fine tweezers that I peel off the excess and then just put it into that Radico again, keeping everything nice and clear. And then we have some low viscosity oils that I'm going to put at the end of that stem where you get metal on metal inside of the keyless works. So knowing that, you know, I add a little bit of oil dabbing in there, this is going into my servicing kind of background, more so of a scholar, more so of a learner at this point. You know, I'm definitely not a professional by any means. I'm probably over oiling it, to be honest with you. It's not something that you have to do, but it's something that makes me sleep better at night, knowing that I put a little bit on there. So I'm putting it at the very end where you have that rectangular kind of box square to it, the very tip of it. And then I'm also putting it where the stem actually locks inside of the watch, right? So when you put that stem in, you know it's fully engaged when it doesn't just fall back out where it locks in. And that's a little bit behind the very end tip of the stem itself. So I apply some low viscosity oils onto it. Now, this is a technique that I use after I oil it. You saw me move the case to the stem rather than the stem to the case, because I feel like there's more movement with your free hand because that piece is super light. So it's a lot more steadier to move the case towards it. And that way I'm not, you know, bumping the sides of where the crown where the stem goes in rather, and getting oil all over it. So that's secure. Obviously, I'm not going to go too crazy on the crown. I'm going to let that glue really, you know, solidify, really dry up, harden, and everything else. And then we have the gasket on the back of the crown that we're going to add some grease to, of course, for longevity and for extra waterproofing. My little technique of tapping that in. Make sure that's flush. That's important. Like, take some time and make sure that that gasket is flush. You don't want it to pinch when you're putting that case back on there. And then we're cleaning, of course, always cleaning, you know, even the case back, guys. And I know that I just cleaned the back of the case back, but I like to be super thorough. And there is a chance that if you don't hit that with the blower on the inside of the case back, that dust particle, if there is some on there, will find its way, work its way around the movement to the dial, or just get into the back of the movement itself where a lot of the pieces are exposed and you can have some interference. So super important. I hand screw that in to make sure that the threading inside the back of the case is lined up nice and proper, and then I do a nice tighten. And you don't have to go too crazy with the tighten on the back of the case. Now, this is another oiling that I do, this time with high velocity grease, and I like to apply that on the threading for the crown. And now, that is only going to make for twisting on and off the crown a little bit smoother. You don't have to do that. That's something that I kind of just made up on my own. So, you know, look into it, see if that's even a thing. For me, it is. It just makes that crown function when I'm winding, or rather when I'm screwing in the crown, it's a lot more smooth. You know, it may attract more dust. So I do what you think is best, but this is what I do. And that's pretty much it. After that, man, that's the home stretch. We pretty much completed the complete build here, and I'm pretty happy with that. So I'm gonna bust out the bracelet now, Jubilee style. Very nice. It has an engraving on the secure buckle, mostly brushed on the clasp itself. Of course, the Jubilee has the polished and brushed kind of like combination to it, and it's a very, very nice bracelet that they have. You don't have to purchase the bracelet. It effectively, I believe the cost of it is $77 USD, but overall the movement, all of the pieces rather, are very affordable, especially if you're putting it up against the original Alpinist. You know, the original one now goes for like 800 plus, and then the Pro Specs, I believe, believe is like $720, $740. So this whole entire build, all of the parts, is less than half the cost. And even if you need to get the bracelet and you need to get the kit for the tools, you're still going to come up hundreds of dollars under what you can get from Seiko. Seiko, I'm sorry, I love you. It is what it is. I'm okay with homages, even if it's one-to-one copy. So, you know, I'm really happy that I'm able to scratch the Alpinist itch, if you will. So getting on that bracelet nice and easy. One thing I did notice is that the pins for it is very, very big, very nice. Like everything else with Namoki, because they make phenomenal parts. And there we have it. I'm going to show you guys the other build that I did not too long ago. I actually did a live for that build, so if you guys have some time, check it out. I'm even more thorough with that live. So anyway, guys, thank you so much for checking in and sticking to the end of this video. Let me know in the comments if you enjoy this style of video and instruction on builds. And please don't forget, this all started with a watch. No matter where your watch collection journey takes you, no matter how you decide to collect, you guys are all welcome on this channel and in this community, as you should be. I thank you guys for checking in, and I'll see you in the next one.